In the vastness of the universe, where stars flicker like distant candles and planets drift in endless silence, there existed a small alien world cloaked in perpetual twilight. The air shimmered with hues of violet and silver, and the ground was laced with crystalline frost that sparkled under the dim glow of twin moons. It was here, on this desolate yet beautiful planet, that an alien woman named Kayla found herself alone, her body trembling from both exhaustion and despair. Kayla's skin glowed faintly, a soft bioluminescence that pulsed weakly as if mirroring the frailty of her spirit. She cradled a tiny bundle against her chest, a child no larger than her forearm, wrapped tightly in a tattered cloth woven from fibers native to their dying land. The infant's delicate antennae twitched feebly, seeking warmth that neither mother nor environment could provide. Her breath came in shallow gasps, each one visible in the frigid air as clouds of vapor that dissipated quickly into nothingness. The journey had been long and unforgiving. Days blended into nights without distinction, and the harsh winds howled ceaselessly around them. Kayla's people were wanderers by nature, nomads who thrived on adaptability, but even they could not withstand the relentless cold that had overtaken their homeland. Resources dwindled, food became scarce, and hope grew thinner with every passing cycle. One by one, her kin succumbed to starvation or froze beneath the merciless skies. Now only she and her newborn remained, clinging to life like fragile embers in a storm. As Kayla trudged through the icy terrain, her legs heavy with fatigue, she felt the weight of inevitability pressing down upon her. Every step forward seemed futile, every heartbeat a reminder of time slipping away. Yet still she pressed on, not for herself, but for the fragile life nestled in her arms. The child stirred occasionally, emitting soft chirps that sounded more like whispers than cries. Each sound tore at Kayla's heart, for it was a plea for survival she feared she could no longer answer. Her thoughts drifted to memories of warmth, of sunlit meadows where rivers flowed freely, of laughter shared among friends during festivals beneath starlit skies. Those days felt impossibly distant now, like fragments of a dream too precious to hold on to. Kayla wondered if her child would ever know such joy or if its existence would be defined solely by struggle and loss. Tears welled up in her luminous eyes, freezing almost instantly as they rolled down her cheeks. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Kayla collapsed onto the frozen earth. Her knees buckled beneath her, and she sank to the ground with a quiet sob. Wrapping her arms tighter around the child, she pulled the thin fabric closer, though it offered little protection against the biting chill. Her energy was spent, her resolve shattered. All she could do now was close her eyes and pray for mercy, for release from this cruel fate. But as darkness began to envelop her consciousness, something unexpected happened. A strange sensation prickled at the edges of her awareness, a warmth unlike anything she'd felt in cycles. At first, she thought it might be delirium, a final trick played by her failing mind. But then she heard it, a voice, low and unfamiliar, speaking words she couldn't understand yet somehow comprehended instinctively. "Hold on," it said, firm yet gentle. "You're not alone." Kayla's eyes fluttered open, though her vision blurred with exhaustion. Through the haze, she saw a figure crouched beside her, its silhouette outlined by an otherworldly glow. It wasn't one of her kind. It was taller, broader, with features that seemed both alien and oddly familiar. Its skin was pale, almost translucent, and its clothing appeared primitive compared to the sleek designs of her people. Yet there was kindness in its gaze, a compassion that transcended species and language. Before she could process what was happening, the figure reached out, wrapping her and the child in a thick, fur-lined blanket. The material radiated heat, seeping into her bones and thawing the ice that had settled deep within her. Kayla wanted to resist, to push away this stranger whose intentions she couldn't fully trust, but her body betrayed her. Instead, she leaned into the warmth, clutching her child protectively as tears streamed down her face once more. The figure spoke again, its tone soothing despite the incomprehensible words. It gestured toward itself, tapping its chest twice before pointing to her. "Human," it said slowly, enunciating the word as if teaching her. Then it pointed to her and tilted its head questioningly. "Kayla," she whispered hoarsely, surprising even herself with the strength it took to form the syllables. The human nodded, repeating her name with care. "Kayla." He smiled, a gesture so simple yet profoundly moving, and placed a hand over his heart. "I am Evan." Though the exchange was brief, it carried a weight far greater than mere introduction. In that moment, Two beings from vastly different worlds connected across the chasm of language and culture, united by a shared understanding of vulnerability and survival. Kayla didn't know why this human had chosen to help her, nor did she fully grasp the implications of his actions. All she knew was that, for the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't facing the abyss alone. Evan worked quickly, his movements efficient and deliberate. With practiced ease, he gathered dry branches and moss from the surrounding area, constructing a makeshift shelter against the biting wind. His hands moved with a rhythm born of necessity, each action imbued with purpose. Kayla watched him silently, her glowing eyes wide with a mixture of awe and apprehension. She had never encountered a creature quite like him. His form was ungainly compared to the lithe grace of her own kind, yet there was an undeniable strength in his presence. Once the shelter was complete, Evan turned his attention to building a fire. He struck 2 stones together repeatedly, sparks flying until one finally caught on the tinder. As flames began to lick hungrily at the wood, Kayla felt a surge of relief wash over her. Fire was rare on her world, reserved for sacred rituals conducted by elders who guarded its secrets fiercely. To see it conjured so casually, and by an outsider no less, was nothing short of miraculous. The warmth spread rapidly, chasing away the oppressive cold that had clung to her like a second skin. For the first time in cycles, Kayla allowed herself to relax, her muscles loosening as the heat seeped into her core. Her child stirred slightly in her arms, responding to the newfound comfort. She glanced down at the tiny being, her heart swelling with gratitude. Perhaps, just perhaps, they might survive this ordeal after all. Evan knelt beside her, offering a small container filled with liquid. He mimed drinking, encouraging her to take it. Hesitant but desperate, Kayla accepted the vessel and sipped cautiously. The taste was strange, earthy and metallic, but it revived her parched throat and sent a wave of energy coursing through her veins. She looked up at Evan, her expression conveying a silent thank you he seemed to understand without words. Despite the immediate relief brought by his intervention, questions swirled in Kayla's mind. Why had he ventured so far from whatever home he called his own? What drove him to risk his life for strangers in such a hostile environment? And most importantly, how could she repay him when they came from worlds apart, bound by neither custom nor obligation? Evan must have sensed her unease, for he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. Though his touch was foreign, it carried no malice, only empathy. He gestured toward the horizon, where the faintest hints of light signaled the approach of dawn. Then he pointed to himself, mimicking walking motions before returning to sit beside her. It was clear he intended to stay, at least for now. Kayla's emotions churned, torn between gratitude and mistrust. On one hand, she owed this human her life, and possibly her child's as well. Without his intervention, they would have perished in the unforgiving wilderness. But on the other hand, accepting aid from an outsider went against everything she had been taught. Her people prized self-reliance above all else, viewing dependence on others as a sign of weakness. Yet here she was, utterly reliant on someone whose motives she couldn't begin to fathom. As the hours passed, Kayla found herself studying Evan closely. There was an earnestness about him that disarmed her skepticism, a purity of intent that transcended barriers of species and circumstance. He tended to the fire with care, ensuring it burned steadily throughout the night. Occasionally, he would glance at her, his expression softening whenever their eyes met. It was in those fleeting moments that Kayla glimpsed something profound, a glimpse of humanity that resonated deeply within her own soul. Still, doubts lingered at the edges of her consciousness. Could she truly trust him? Was his kindness genuine, or merely a prelude to some ulterior motive? These questions gnawed at her, preventing her from fully surrendering to the comfort he provided. Yet as the fire crackled softly and the warmth continued to envelop them, Kayla realized she had little choice but to accept his help, for now at least. Survival demanded compromise, even if it meant setting aside deeply ingrained beliefs. And so, as the first rays of sunlight pierced the horizon, casting long shadows across the frost-covered landscape, Kayla made a silent vow. She would remain vigilant, observing Evan's actions and gauging his true intentions. Until then, she would allow herself to rest, drawing strength from the fire he had built and the warmth he had shared. For better or worse, their fates were intertwined now, bound together by circumstances neither could have foreseen. As the sun rose higher, painting the sky in shades of lavender and gold, Kayla noticed subtle changes in Evan's demeanor. While his earlier actions had been driven by urgency, now he moved with a calm deliberation, as though assessing their situation with newfound clarity. He rummaged through a satchel slung over his shoulder, pulling out various items: strips of dried meat, a small knife, and what appeared to be medicinal herbs. Placing these objects carefully on the ground, he gestured toward the food, encouraging Kayla to eat. Though hunger gnawed at her stomach, Kayla hesitated. Accepting sustenance from him felt like crossing another invisible boundary, one that marked the difference between surviving independently and relying entirely on another being. But her child stirred again, emitting faint chirps that reminded her of their shared vulnerability. Reluctantly, she reached for the offered morsel, chewing slowly as its rich flavor awakened dormant senses. Evan watched her intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. When she finished eating, he pointed to her child and mimed feeding, clearly asking whether the infant required nourishment. Kayla nodded, her glowing eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and anxiety. Producing a small vial from his satchel, Evan handed it to her, demonstrating how to administer the liquid drop by drop. The concoction smelled herbal, reminiscent of remedies used by her people, and Kayla felt a pang of recognition. Perhaps this human wasn't entirely unfamiliar with the ways of survival. With renewed determination, Kayla focused on caring for her child, following Evan's guidance while keeping a wary eye on him. Despite her lingering suspicions, she couldn't deny the effectiveness of his methods. The infant's breathing grew steadier, its tiny body warming gradually under the combined efforts of the fire and the blanket. Watching her child respond positively, Kayla allowed herself a moment of hope, a fragile ember that flickered tentatively in the depths of her heart. Yet even as she nurtured this fragile optimism, Kayla remained acutely aware of the precariousness of their situation. Evan's supplies, though generous, were finite. They would need to find sustainable resources soon if they hoped to endure beyond the immediate crisis. Glancing around, she scanned the barren landscape, searching for any sign of edible plants or potential shelter. The terrain stretched endlessly, its beauty marred by the harsh realities of scarcity and isolation. Evan seemed to share her concerns, for he stood abruptly, gazing toward the horizon with a thoughtful expression. Turning back to Kayla, he pointed to himself, then mimicked walking again, this time incorporating gestures indicating exploration. Understanding dawned on her. He intended to scout the area, seeking solutions to their predicament. Part of her wanted to protest, to insist that she accompany him, but reason prevailed. She was still too weak, too drained to undertake such a task, and leaving the child unprotected was unthinkable. Instead, she nodded reluctantly, signaling her consent. Evan responded with a reassuring smile, gathering his belongings and preparing to depart. Before leaving, he added more fuel to the fire, ensuring it would burn brightly in his absence. Then, with a final glance at Kayla and the child, he stepped into the vast expanse, his figure growing smaller with each stride until he disappeared entirely from view. Alone once more, Kayla huddled closer to the fire, her thoughts racing. Trusting Evan required faith not only in his abilities but also in his intentions. If he returned empty-handed, or worse, failed to return at all, their chances of survival would diminish drastically. Yet something deep within her whispered that he wouldn't abandon them, that his actions thus far weren't motivated by mere altruism but by a genuine desire to help. Whether this intuition stemmed from desperation or genuine insight, she couldn't say. Time passed agonizingly slowly. The fire crackled softly, its warmth providing a semblance of security. Kayla alternated between tending to her child and scanning the horizon, hoping to catch a glimpse of Evan's returning form. Doubts crept in during moments of silence, whispering insidious possibilities. What if he encountered danger? What if he decided helping them wasn't worth the risk? Each unanswered question fueled her anxiety, threatening to unravel the fragile peace she had managed to achieve. But amidst the turmoil, Kayla clung to one unshakable truth. She and her child were alive because of Evan. Whatever uncertainties lay ahead, whatever challenges awaited them, they had survived the night, a feat that seemed impossible mere hours ago. And though the road ahead remained shrouded in mystery, she resolved to face it with courage, drawing strength from the bond forged in the crucible of shared adversity. Hours stretched into what felt like an eternity as Kayla sat by the fire, her eyes fixed on the horizon where Evan had vanished. The wind carried whispers of distant echoes, teasing her senses with phantom sounds that could have been footsteps or simply the restless sighs of the wilderness. Each gust stirred fresh waves of doubt, making her question whether she had made the right decision in letting him go. Yet beneath the surface of her anxiety, a quiet resolve began to take root, a determination to endure, no matter the outcome. When the sun reached its zenith, bathing the landscape in a pale golden glow, movement finally caught her attention. Squinting against the glare, Kayla spotted a figure approaching from afar. Relief surged through her veins as she recognized Evan's unmistakable gait. He moved with purpose, his arms laden with bundles of vegetation and several small creatures slung over his shoulder. His expression was triumphant, his eyes alight with satisfaction as he drew nearer. Kayla rose unsteadily to her feet, clutching her child protectively as Evan entered the circle of warmth cast by the fire. Dropping his burdens gently to the ground, he grinned, pointing to the items he had gathered. Among them were clusters of edible roots, berries with vibrant hues, and the limp forms of small animals whose pelts gleamed softly in the sunlight. Kayla's heart leapt at the sight. These were resources she hadn't dared hope to find so quickly. Evan wasted no time demonstrating how to prepare the food. Using his knife, he skillfully skinned and gutted the animals, setting aside the meat to be cooked over the fire. Next, he crushed the roots and berries into a paste, mixing them with water to create a nourishing broth. Throughout the process, he communicated through gestures and expressions, ensuring Kayla understood each step. His patience and precision spoke volumes about his experience, hinting at a life shaped by survival against formidable odds. As the aroma of roasting meat wafted through the air, Kayla felt a surge of gratitude mingled with admiration. Evan's resourcefulness was remarkable, his ability to adapt to an alien environment nothing short of extraordinary. Watching him work, she realized he possessed qualities that transcended physical strength or technical skill, qualities like resilience, ingenuity, and an unwavering commitment to life itself. These traits resonated deeply with her own values, bridging the gap between their disparate worlds. When the meal was ready, Evan handed Kayla a portion, insisting she eat first. Though hunger gnawed at her, she hesitated, gesturing for him to partake alongside her. He shook his head firmly, his expression leaving no room for argument. Relenting, she took the food, savoring the rich flavors that revived her flagging energy. After finishing, she fed her child, marveling at how quickly the infant responded to the nourishment. Strength seemed to flow back into their fragile bodies, bolstered by the sustenance Evan had provided. Satisfied that they were cared for, Evan finally sat down to eat, his movements slower now, tinged with exhaustion. Kayla observed him closely, noting the fine lines etched into his face, the dust coating his clothes, and the slight tremor in his hands. Despite his apparent weariness, his eyes retained their steady glow, reflecting a spirit unbroken by hardship. She felt a pang of guilt for having doubted him earlier, recognizing now the depth of his sacrifice and the lengths he had gone to ensure their survival. Their shared meal fostered a sense of camaraderie that transcended language barriers. Words weren't necessary to convey the mutual respect blossoming between them. Through simple gestures and shared glances, they communicated volumes, forging a connection rooted in mutual dependency and trust. Kayla found herself opening up in ways she hadn't anticipated, allowing Evan glimpses of her inner world through expressions and subtle shifts in her bioluminescent glow. As dusk approached, casting long shadows across the frost-laden ground, Kayla reflected on the day's events. Evan's actions had not only secured their immediate survival but had also planted seeds of hope within her weary heart. For the first time since embarking on this harrowing journey, she entertained the possibility of a future, not just for herself and her child, but for the burgeoning partnership taking shape before her eyes. Night fell swiftly, blanketing the world in velvety darkness punctuated by the soft glow of the fire. Evan tended to the flames with practiced ease, ensuring they burned steadily throughout the evening. Kayla sat beside him, her child nestled securely in her arms, feeling an unfamiliar sense of peace settle over her. The cold still lingered at the edges of their sanctuary, but it no longer held dominion over them. Together, they had carved out a haven amidst the desolation, a testament to the power of unity and perseverance. Yet as the stars emerged one by one, casting their ethereal light upon the frozen expanse, Kayla couldn't shake the nagging awareness that their trials were far from over. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new uncertainties to navigate. But for now, surrounded by the warmth of the fire and the steady presence of her unlikely ally, she allowed herself to rest, to dream of possibilities that once seemed beyond reach. As the fire crackled softly in the quiet of the night, Kayla's thoughts drifted to what lay ahead. The resources Evan had gathered were a lifeline, but they wouldn't last forever. She knew this planet well enough to understand that survival here required constant vigilance and adaptation. Her people had thrived for generations by moving with the seasons, following migratory patterns of wildlife and harvesting plants during fleeting periods of abundance. But now, with their numbers decimated and their traditions fractured, those strategies felt like distant memories. Evan seemed to sense her unease. He leaned back against the makeshift shelter, his gaze fixed on the stars above. After a moment, he turned to her, pointing upward and tracing constellations in the sky with his finger. Though she couldn't comprehend his words, his tone was contemplative, almost reverent. It occurred to Kayla that perhaps he too was searching for meaning in this vast, indifferent universe, a shared longing that transcended their differences. Encouraged by his openness, Kayla decided to share something of her own. Carefully unwrapping the cloth around her child, she revealed intricate patterns woven into the fabric. Each design told a story: spirals symbolizing cycles of life, jagged lines representing storms endured, and delicate dots signifying moments of joy. Evan studied the patterns intently, his brow furrowed as if trying to decipher their secrets. When she pointed to one spiral and then gestured toward the horizon, mimicking the rising sun, his eyes lit up with understanding. He nodded slowly, tapping his chest twice before pointing at her. It was a small exchange, yet it carried profound significance. For the first time since meeting him, Kayla felt seen, not just as a desperate mother clinging to survival, but as someone with a history, a culture, and a voice worth hearing. That realization softened the walls she had built around herself, allowing trust to seep through the cracks. The next morning broke with an eerie stillness. The winds that usually howled across the plains were absent, leaving behind an unnatural calm. Evan rose early, inspecting the perimeter of their camp with sharp, assessing eyes. Satisfied that no immediate threats loomed, he turned his attention to preparing another meal. This time, however, he included Kayla in the process, guiding her hands as she learned to skin and prepare the meat. His touch was gentle but firm, patient without being condescending. By the end of the lesson, Kayla found herself smiling faintly, a rare expression given everything they'd endured. But even as they worked together, tension lingered beneath the surface. Evan kept glancing toward the horizon, his jaw tightening whenever clouds gathered ominously in the distance. Kayla noticed this and realized he was planning something significant. When he finally sat down beside her, sketching crude maps in the dirt with a stick, she understood. He intended to lead them to higher ground, where the frost might be less severe and resources more abundant. Kayla hesitated. Leaving the relative safety of their current location meant venturing deeper into unknown territory, where dangers lurked unseen. Yet staying put offered little guarantee of survival either. The choice weighed heavily on her shoulders, not only for her sake but for her child's. Finally, after a long silence, she nodded, placing her hand over his in a gesture of agreement. Preparations began immediately. Evan packed their meager belongings while Kayla bundled her child tightly, ensuring every layer of warmth was secured. They set out just as the twin moons dipped below the horizon, casting the world in shades of indigo and silver. The journey was grueling from the start. The terrain grew steeper, the air thinner, and the temperature plummeted with each step upward. Kayla struggled to keep pace, her weakened body protesting every movement. Several times, Evan stopped to help her, offering his arm for support or adjusting the weight of her pack. Despite the physical toll, there were moments of unexpected beauty. As they ascended, the landscape transformed. Crystalline formations jutted out of the ground like frozen waves, catching the light in dazzling bursts of color. Strange flora emerged from the frost, their translucent petals glowing faintly in the dim light. Kayla marveled at these wonders, feeling a flicker of awe pierce through her exhaustion. Even Evan paused occasionally, his face softening as he took in the alien splendor surrounding them. Yet danger was never far away. On the third day of their climb, a low rumble echoed through the valley below. Both Kayla and Evan froze, scanning the horizon for the source of the sound. Moments later, a massive avalanche roared down the mountainside, swallowing everything in its path. Panic surged through Kayla as she clutched her child closer, her heart pounding wildly. Without hesitation, Evan grabbed her wrist and pulled her toward a narrow crevice in the rocks, shoving her inside before squeezing in himself. The roar of the avalanche drowned out all other sounds, shaking the very earth beneath them. Kayla pressed herself against the cold stone, shielding her child with her body as debris rained down outside. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as they waited for the chaos to subside. When the noise finally faded, Evan cautiously peeked out, his face pale but resolute. He helped Kayla emerge, brushing snow off her shoulders as they assessed the damage. Their path forward was obliterated, buried under tons of ice and rock. Kayla stared at the destruction, despair clawing at her chest. All their efforts, all their sacrifices, it seemed futile now. But Evan refused to let despair take hold. Grabbing her hand firmly, he pointed upward, his expression unwavering. "Higher," he said, his voice steady despite the circumstances. "We go higher." And so they pressed on, driven by sheer willpower and the unspoken promise they had made to each other. With each step, Kayla felt her connection to Evan deepen. He wasn't just a savior or an ally anymore. He was a companion, someone who shared her burdens and amplified her strength. Together, they faced the unforgiving wilderness, carving out a fragile existence amidst the ruins of their old lives. By the time they reached the plateau, the air was thin and biting, and the ground was covered in a thick layer of frost that crunched underfoot. Despite the harsh conditions, signs of life began to appear. Hardy shrubs clinging to rocky outcrops, streams trickling through icy channels, and flocks of avian creatures wheeling overhead. Evan wasted no time setting up a temporary shelter, using materials scavenging from the journey. Kayla joined him, her movements more confident now, her spirit buoyed by the knowledge that they had reached safer ground. As they settled in for the night, Kayla gazed at the stars once more. They seemed brighter here, untainted by the haze of lower altitudes. Beside her, Evan wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her closer to share his warmth. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, she allowed herself to relax completely, leaning into his embrace. Her child slept peacefully between them, cocooned in layers of fabric and love. In that moment, surrounded by the vastness of the cosmos and the comforting presence of an unlikely friend, Kayla dared to hope. Hope that they would find a way to thrive in this unforgiving land. Hope that her child would grow strong and healthy, carrying forward the legacy of her people. And hope that whatever challenges awaited them, they would face them together. Little did she know, their trials were far from over. Unbeknownst to both of them, forces beyond their comprehension were stirring in the shadows, drawn to the resilience and bond they had forged. Forces that would test not only their survival skills but the very essence of their humanity, or lack thereof. As days turned into weeks, Kayla and Evan settled into a fragile rhythm on the plateau. They hunted, gathered, and cared for the child together, their bond growing stronger with each shared challenge. Yet, strange occurrences began to unsettle them, unexplained shadows flitting at the edge of their camp, eerie whispers carried by the wind, and faint glowing lights that seemed to watch from afar. One night, as they huddled by the fire, the ground trembled violently. From the darkness emerged towering figures, their forms shimmering like liquid starlight. The beings spoke in harmonious tones, addressing Evan directly. "You have meddled where you do not belong," they intoned. "This world is dying, and your presence disrupts its final cycle." Evan stood protectively in front of Kayla and the child, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. "We're just trying to survive," he replied. "Isn't that what life is about?" The beings paused, their luminous gazes shifting to Kayla and the infant. A long silence followed before one of them spoke again. "Perhaps survival is not yours to claim here. But hope may yet rewrite fate." With that, the figures dissolved into the night, leaving behind an ancient artifact pulsating with light. As Kayla reached for it, her bioluminescent glow merged with its radiance, illuminating the plateau in a cascade of colors. Evan watched in awe as the frost receded, revealing lush greenery and flowing rivers beneath. Though their future remained uncertain, Kayla and Evan knew one thing for sure: together,